Everyone is confused about food right now. There are supplements to take, diets to follow, ingredients to avoid, and products promising things they cannot deliver. I have stood in supermarket aisles feeling genuinely lost, holding something with 40 ingredients and wondering how we got here. And then it occurred to me, the most read book in human history has been describing a very specific table for thousands of years. Real food, simple preparation. Meals that made people feel like they had actually eaten something. Lentils, figs, olive oil, honey, fish. The ingredients are not the secret. How they prepared them is, and that part most of us completely forgot. But it is not the ingredients alone. And that is what nobody tells you. We eat more food than any generation before us and somehow feel less nourished. You know that feeling after a fast meal where nothing quite settles? Where you finish eating and still feel like something is missing? I do. I spent years chasing that feeling away with better snacks, more supplements, more expensive products. And the strange thing is, I already owned the answer. I had a Bible on my shelf and a spice rack in my kitchen, and I had never once connected the two. What those ancient people put on the table was not complicated, but the way they put it together mattered more than any single ingredient. Let me start at the very beginning. Genesis 25. Esau comes in from the field exhausted and famished, and his brother Jacob is standing over a pot of red lentil stew. Esau trades his birthright for a bowl of it. I used to read that and think it was a bad deal. I do not think that anymore. Red lentils cooked the way they were likely prepared then, long and slow, with cumin, with onions softened in a little fat, with warm spices that turn the kitchen golden smelling, are not diet food. They are something completely different. The mistake most people make today is rushing them. They boil lentils quickly, skip the fat, serve them plain, and then wonder why they taste like nothing. But the method matters. Cumin toasted in a dry pan before it goes into the pot. Onion cooked until it is almost sweet. And then, when the bowl is ready and the lentils have gone creamy and thick, a pour of good olive oil directly onto the warm surface. That is not decoration. That is the preparation. The oil blooms in the heat, picks up the cumin, coats every spoonful. That is why it was worth trading a birthright for. I used to wonder about that line. I do not anymore, but lentils are just the beginning. Honey appears in the Bible more times than I can count easily. A land flowing with milk and honey, Jonathan dipping his staff in a honeycomb and his eyes brightening after. Ezekiel eating a scroll that tasted like honey. It was not treated as a sweetener. It was treated as sustenance. And the version they were eating looked nothing like the pale, thin, squeezable honey in most kitchens today. It was raw, dark amber, thick enough to hold its shape on a spoon, almost entirely unprocessed. That matters, because raw honey has a flavor and a richness that the processed version has largely lost. The old way was to finish a meal with something simple, not a complicated dessert, a piece of rough barley bread spread with honey, a split fig beside it. The sweetness signaled to the body that the meal was complete. It was not indulgence, it was ritual. My grandmother kept a jar of raw honeycomb in her pantry wrapped in cloth. I thought she was old-fashioned. Turns out she was closer to the biblical table than I ever gave her credit for. If your family kept something like this, raw honey, pressed figs, anything like that in the pantry, I really want to hear about it in the comments. Now, fish. The Galilee table. The New Testament is full of it. Jesus feeds thousands with it. He cooks it over coals on the shore after the resurrection. His disciples are fishermen. It is the everyday protein of that world, and the way it was cooked was almost insultingly simple. Fire, salt, herbs, that is it. The mistake we make today is overcomplicating it. We cook fish in heavy sauces that mask everything underneath, or we overcook it until it falls apart in the wrong way and loses the richness that makes it satisfying. The biblical method: a whole small fish, coals beneath it, coriander or hyssop pressed on top, a piece of flatbread beside it, produces something that tastes completely of itself. Simple seasoning on a simple protein is a complete meal in a way that 30-ingredient dishes sometimes are not. If it was good enough for that morning on the shore, it is good enough for a Tuesday. Barley bread, not wheat, barley. The loaves in the feeding of the 5,000 were barley loaves. It was the bread of ordinary people, of long days, of working hands, dense, slightly bitter, whole, filling in a way that a slice of supermarket bread simply is not. You can make a basic barley flatbread at home with barley flour, water, a pinch of salt, and a little olive oil pressed into a round and cooked in a dry pan. The bitterness of the barley is exactly what makes honey and olive oil taste brighter alongside it. The contrast is the point. Biblical bread was not trying to be delicate. That was never the goal. Simple bread meant you could make it anywhere, which meant you always had it. And figs. Figs may be the most mentioned fruit in the Bible, appearing from Genesis through Revelation. But the detail that stopped me was in 1 Samuel. An exhausted Egyptian servant who had not eaten for 3 days is given a piece of pressed fig cake, and the text says his spirit returned to him. That image stayed with me, a pressed fig cake. Dried figs compressed into a small, solid block, naturally sweet, dense with energy, easy to carry and store. That was the ancient world's travel food, its recovery food. It's something when there is nothing food. You can do a simpler version at home. Dried figs soaked overnight in warm water and eaten in the morning with a spoonful of raw honey are nothing like the sugary fig bars in the bakery aisle. They are a different food entirely, but there is one ingredient I have not mentioned yet, and it appears in almost every meal on this list. Olive oil is not just a cooking fat in the Bible, it is everywhere. Bread is dipped in it, grain is anointed with it, it is poured over food as a finishing gesture of abundance. And here is where I see modern kitchens making the biggest mistake with a biblical ingredient. We cook with olive oil at high heat. We use it as a neutral base. We pour the pale commercial version into a hot pan and let it go. But the biblical use was almost always finishing, drizzling, pouring, low and slow. The oil used in that world was cold-pressed, unfiltered, thick, almost grassy, with a peppery catch at the back of the throat that the commercial bottle on the supermarket shelf simply does not have. Try this once. Cook your lentils, your grain, your warm barley bread, and then pour the best olive oil you can find, cold, directly over the finished dish. Not during cooking, after. The difference is immediate and startling. The richness, the grassy bite, the way it settles the whole bowl into something that actually tastes like food. That is the ingredient the Bible was describing. If you have only ever used the pale yellow version, you may not have met it yet. Now, pomegranates. They appear in the Song of Solomon, in Numbers, in Exodus, described as one of the fruits of the Promised Land, their image carved into the hem of the high priest's robe, and bitter herbs, still eaten at every Passover Seder, horseradish, bitter endive, chicory, were once an ordinary part of the daily table. Not ceremonial, everyday, eaten alongside rich meat and bread as a contrast, the way lemon cuts through fat. We lost that habit almost entirely. I added pomegranate seeds to my lentil bowl one afternoon because an old recipe told me to. I have not stopped doing it since. The brightness against the earthy warmth of the lentils is exactly the kind of contrast that makes a simple meal feel considered. And then there is the pot, the slow pot. Lamb bones or goat bones, water, salt, a bundle of herbs, and time. Hours of time. In the Old Testament, broth is not a trend. It is what you make when you have bones and a fire and enough patience to let the water do the work. Abraham serves his guests roasted calf with bread and curds. Gideon prepares a kid and unleavened bread. There is always a pot, and it has always been on the fire long enough to matter. The stock cube on the kitchen shelf is not the same thing, not because of what it contains, but because of what it lacks: the hours. Bone broth made properly, a heavy pot, good bones, cold water starting cold, herbs added partway through, a long, unhurried simmer, produces something thick and golden and deeply savory that feels, in the body, entirely different from anything poured from a carton. This is where the fascination with bone broth comes from. Not a new supplement, a very old pot. Dates. Raisin cakes referenced in the Song of Solomon. These were the portable food, the energy of long journeys and long days. Not coated in chocolate, not pressed into bars with 12 other ingredients. Just dried, whole, sweet, and concentrated. A plate of medjool dates beside a small bowl of raw tahini, sesame paste, plain and pale, is one of the simplest things I have ever eaten, and one of the most satisfying. It is still eaten in exactly this way across the Middle East today. The first time I tried it, I thought, this has been someone's afternoon for 6,000 years. Now here is the part I saved for last, because it is the part that changes how I think about everything I just described. The food itself is almost secondary. What the biblical table describes, when you read it carefully, is a rhythm, a slow fire, long preparation, sitting down, eating with other people, finishing with something sweet, resting afterward. The table was not a fast stop between other tasks. It was the event, and we have removed almost every part of that rhythm from modern eating while keeping some of the ingredients. I can make perfect lentils with good olive oil and fresh cumin and eat them in a car in 3 minutes and feel almost nothing. Or I can make the same bowl and sit down with bread and bitter herbs and someone I want to sit with and feel the difference by the time the bowl is empty. The ingredient did not change. The table did. The text does not just describe what people ate. It describes how they sat down, who they sat with, and how long they stayed. That is the forgotten part, not a recipe, a ritual. Save this video, not for the list, but for that reminder. The table was always meant to be the place where you felt better. None of this requires anything you cannot find at a regular market or already have in your kitchen. Red lentils, raw honey, good olive oil, figs, barley flour, a pomegranate, medjool dates and a jar of tahini, bones for a slow pot, simple herbs. The oldest recipe book most of us own has been sitting on a shelf, and the table it describes has been waiting. Which one are you going to try first?